Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Wrapping up the year, wrapping up 2025. We are going to be putting out the last weekend perspective show of the year, at least for me. Aaron and I have one more show coming up on, we're going to publish that on New Year's Eve. Not that any of you necessarily want to listen to that before you go out and have a good time and, kind of watch 2025 leave and 2026 come along. But I wanted to get a couple more shows out for you. I know a lot of people still are traveling some and need some things to pass the time and all. But first off, thank you all for an amazing year. It's been a really interesting year for us doing the podcast. We know we've had a ton of interesting guests. So thank you to all of our guests who have been on the show. Thank you to all the sponsors who have been with us throughout the year. And most importantly, thank you to all of you for giving us some of your time each and every week, a couple of times a week for those of you that are regular listeners. And, we know it is, you have a lot of choices out there. We know it takes quite a bit of a commitment to spend some time with us and listen to, both the things that we have to share as far as trying to help you learn some things, but also some of the nonsense that we put you through. So thank you all for listening. Thank you all for being loyal. Thank you for helping us grow the show. And we're going to wrap up. I got two more shows for the year. This one will be kind of a weekend perspective, not too long. And then Aaron and I do our last sort of long show for the year where we sort of look at some predictions and some things for looking into 2026. The show was interesting, or this year was really interesting. I sort of titling this one, The Craziest Year So Far, comes to a close. And as I think about the year, it was a year that was just, anytime you ever got comfortable, something changed. And, change is inevitable in our industry. Change is really the only thing that we can be sure of is sort of the constant within our industry. But it was probably the biggest, at least that I can remember. And some of this is magnified by, the amount of money that was invested into our industry this past year, but just the amount of change, the magnitude of the change, the sort of magnitude of the headlines of what's going on. And I think part of that is just because, we've been through a number of, so Aaron and I this will be the end of our 15th year having done the podcast. We'll be going into next year. Actually, maybe, yeah, that's right. Yeah. So we've been through the cloud era, the mobile era. We've been through, seeing, cloud native emerge. We've seen now AI emerge. We've seen a number of kind of eras come and go in this industry, as well as, some that we lived through before that. So this one felt like maybe the craziest year, at least the greatest amount of change that had large scale implications of any that we've ever seen. And I sort of go through this. You sort of made a list. AI has become a mainstream technology, but it's become a mainstream technology for businesses, whether it is a consumer technology or a business technology. It has become a political talking point. It has become a social impact talking point, whether it is around jobs or whether it's around climate or whatever it is. And that's probably one of the first times that a technology has been that widely integrated into what goes on with our lives, whether it's a conversation you're having at the dinner table with friends and family, whether it is a conversation you're having at work, whether it is something that's being discussed on the nightly news, as a political topic or, a pawn in some cases between, large countries and regulation that's happening within your country. That sort of felt like the backdrop for a lot of this. It felt like AI went through about 7 years of news cycles in 1 year. And, as I kind of think about some of the real highlights of the year, and again, these aren't necessarily highlights, but just big moments that happened. I feel like the year sort of kicked off with the DeepSeek moment, which was, the Chinese lab, DeepSeek, who came out with their model. And it really questioned, are NVIDIA chips needed? Right, we were sitting there on what felt like very much a duopoly of an OpenAI and NVIDIA chips, and at least DeepSeek was sort of the first one to really kind of put out there, is it possible that whether it's a frontier lab or whether it is the future of open source or whatever it might be, is NVIDIA going to be as dominant as they are, and has the world started to figure out workarounds, alternatives to the to sort of the NVIDIA monopoly, if you will, on on software and chips. And that that answer didn't necessarily come out throughout the rest of the year, but it was a starting point for, okay, is that even possible? We closed the year this past week, and we'll get into it in AI and cloud news of the month, probably with Brandon here in a few days. NVIDIA acquihired a company called Grok, Grok with a Q, Groq, and their technology. And essentially, what it said was, here is technology that they're going to license, which is a lower cost capability for AI inference. And so we began the year from a software perspective, asking if we totally needed NVIDIA, chipsets everywhere, whether it was in training or whether it's in inference. And NVIDIA sort of closed the year by saying, hey, there may be a need for, alternatives, and there is viability of alternatives. And I think that really kind of got, put into perspective for some people. Everybody at the beginning of any sort of industry transition, a new era, whatever it is, is always trying to figure out, like, well, where will this go? How big will something be? How big is this compared to something else? And we still have no idea what sort of impact AI will have, which, like, we never had any idea how big cloud was be or the internet would be during those transitions, 15 and 30 years ago. But one number that's been floating around is OpenAI, who's obviously a big player in it, has now forecast 100x their current revenue in future computing needs. So that almost means, right now they're at, say, 13 billion. They're forecasting a need for 1.3 trillion, 1.4 trillion dollars in compute. That almost means, 100x. It probably actually almost means like 200x their current compute need, but by the time you throw on margins and things like that. So, we're starting to get a sense of, people are starting to think in terms of orders of magnitude, how much bigger this is going to be. And so, some of those are big pillars that went on within our world of, like, what do the economics look like? Where will the change from a technology perspective and economics perspective come from? Is it always going to be, U.S. centric? We've now seen both the U.S. as well as Asia Pacific and China be involved. We've seen, huge amounts of investment coming both from, traditional places like Silicon Valley, but we're also seeing it from sovereign wealth funds. We're seeing it from around the world. So it is a global phenomenon, unlike, somewhat different than maybe we've seen in the past. It is being, dictated early and often by economics, whether they are high-end economics like NVIDIA, or whether it is disruptive economics like DeepSeek or Grok or other types of technologies. In the cloud space, and we talked about this over the last couple of weeks, we're beginning to see maybe not. AWS's massive lead in cloud is now starting to be kind of called into question. And while they are still, the undisputed sort of leaders in cloud and cloud infrastructure, their lead is beginning to get smaller. Has been getting smaller over the last 3 or 4 years. And the buying criteria, the decisions that people are making as far as where they're going to run their workloads, again, it is being called into question. And again, whether it's, which cloud do we go to, whether it is some amount of companies pulling things back into their private cloud environments, we're seeing that shift over the last 15 years start to, have some different characteristics as we better understand those technologies, we better understand the economics of those things. Google finally got their act together. They invented the generative AI technology back in 2017 with the Transformer paper. Many people felt like they just sort of, missed that boat. 2025 was really the year in which they got their act together. They reorganized themselves around certain teams. They reorganized themselves around certain technologies, with certain leadership that had a long track record of having done really powerful things at Google. They came out with their counters to the OpenAI, to ChatGPT, to what they want to begin to have in the enterprise, and how they're going to counter the concerns about their monopoly, whether it's in search or in other types of things. So a lot of things went Google's way this year. From not being deemed a monopoly to their search business not being cannibalized by OpenAI, at least not yet. So they really answered the bell quite a bit in sort of sporting parlance, in terms of things looked not great for them. Middle of last year, beginning of this year, they sort of come out of the year with very much a gold star. So, huge changes there, huge changes at Microsoft. Microsoft really, had been in a very, very strong position, both in terms of their cloud business growing quite a bit, their AI business growing quite a bit. But they went through, in essence, sort of a breakup, or at least we're open to seeing other people situation with OpenAI, their chosen partner. What felt like their advantage is now sort of become, an ownership position to a partnership position, and that changes the dynamics of Microsoft significantly, both in terms of what they can offer their customers, both in terms of what sort of investments they're going to have to make, which means what their economics are going to look like. So huge changes across all the major cloud providers, across industries, geographic industries where things were happening, economic pieces of where money was coming from. So just a huge thing. We saw the US government, get involved with either bailing out or socializing Intel to a certain extent. Something that you would have never necessarily expected to see out of, the US economy, which is always very, capitalistic centric and, meritocracy based. But I think that it signals, a couple things. It signals the importance of some of these technologies, both from a technology perspective, but also from a national security perspective. And again, comes back to this idea that this technology, whether it is chip manufacturing, and again, manufacturing has been a constant of economic growth for continents and countries, and for 150 plus years now, since we've gone through the industrial revolution. It's now coming back around to the sort of the industrial chip revolution. But seeing governments become more involved with both the private economy as well as the public economy. So a ton of things happening there. We saw Bitcoin have a somewhat of a tumultuous year, not a radical year. They began the year at 94,000, went up to 125,000. Finished the year down around 84,000. So up 25%, back down 15%. So the crypto and the sort of future banking spaces of this stuff where technology is involved, again, it's very, very hard to see the old silos of our economy, of the way things operate, not intersect with technology. And this year was just another year in which that very much happened. So, all those things happened. That's just sort of scratching the surface. I know we talked about a lot of that in some of the weekend wrap-up shows and the year-end wrap-up shows and so forth. I'll finish with one last story that felt a little bit crazy. And I think we've told maybe bits and pieces of this, but maybe not the full story. Around the middle of the year, I woke up one morning and my wife was scrolling through her social media, and she said, "Oh, did you see this crazy thing that happened at the Coldplay concert?" And I said, "No, I wasn't paying attention to that stuff. I'm not a huge Coldplay fan. It's fine." And she said, "Oh yeah, this couple appears like they were having an affair, and they just randomly got called out at the Coldplay concert." And I thought, "Oh, okay, whatever, no big deal." Didn't really think anything of it. And then as the day went along, and my wife was digging into it and being curious about it, just for whatever reasons, because again, it was blowing up social media, and of course, the internet did what they did, and they figured out who everybody was who had been part of the alleged affair. And it turns out that one of them was the CEO of a tech company. And she says, "Oh my gosh, can you believe this was the CEO of a tech company?" And I said, "Yeah, honey, I don't know. Those things happen. I don't really care." And and again, the day went on, and didn't really think much about it. And later on, she said, "Oh, they figured out it was the name of this company was Astronomer, and they're an AI company. You should look into them. You guys figure out if maybe they're a company that would be interesting to be on your podcast, right?" Because she knows a little bit about what we do at the podcast. And I said, "Yeah, I don't know. We'll see." And as the day went along, I got to thinking about it, and I said, "Astronomer, that sounds sort of familiar." And one of the things that happened this year was, our schedules sort of began the year in such a way that Aaron started doing a number of the Wednesday interviews. I was traveling a ton at the beginning of the year. He ended up filling in and helping out and doing a number of the Wednesday interviews. And that just sort of became our new thing. Aaron did the Wednesday interview with one of our guests, and I did the Sunday perspective or weekend perspective. And it hadn't necessarily been that cut and dry in the past, but that sort of started happening. So in reality, I wasn't as close to the Wednesday shows and all the guests and so forth. But the name astronomer did kind of ring a bell because we both ended up doing some publishing and some editing. And I was like, God, I wonder, maybe we did talk to those folks at some point. Like, I don't know. I don't remember. So I did a quick Google search and typed in Cloudcast and astronomer. And boom, it turns out that literally the Wednesday before, so this thing happened on a weekend, the Wednesday before, we had actually interviewed astronomer. And the reality is the way that we interview our shows and we do our show is in some cases we will, we'll interview the guest, a week before it publishes. And sometimes just based on schedules, we interview the guest, several weeks or several months before it published. And so Aaron had actually interviewed I believe a CTO of astronomer, not the person involved with the incident, but the CTO of astronomer, maybe a couple of months before. And so I did remember seeing that name floating around, and it just so happened that that Wednesday before the incident happened, like on a Friday or Saturday, Aaron had published the show, and so I pinged him and I said, "Hey, do you remember interviewing these guys?" And he said, "Oh yeah, we had a good conversation." I said, "Have you heard what happened, with the company?" And he was like me, wasn't totally paying attention to social media. And he said, "No, I have no idea what you're talking about." And so I sent him the stuff, and we got kind of a good laugh out of it. And it was kind of weird, funny coincidence that we had interviewed this company previously, but we had just so happened to have published this thing before. And so the whole point of this has nothing to do with them. They do what they do. They're a fine company. People make mistakes and people make decisions and so forth. And our conversation with them had nothing to do with what happened at Coldplay. But what became sort of interesting was people started doing some Google searches. And what immediately happened was the astronomer folks, as many people do during PR crisis, will sort of turn off their social media. They don't want people to start making all sorts of random comments and other things like that. And so what seemed to happen was, because we had published our show so soon after the public incident had happened, we became one of the top things that showed up in search, whether it was on Google or whether it was on Twitter or wherever it was. And so people started copying us on that. And we probably, on the main thing, one of the main tweets that went out that sort of uncovered all this stuff, we got copied on it. And that was probably our biggest engagement moment ever. I think we had about 400,000 likes or whatever on the tweet, and no one necessarily people liked it, or maybe it was 400,000 comments. I forgot what it was, but somehow out of just pure coincidence and dumb luck and whatever, we kind of got ourselves not in the middle of the thing. I don't think anybody necessarily associated with us with that, but because our account was still open, and because the Wednesday before we had published the show and we had done our normal social media stuff and said, "Hey, here's us talking to the folks from Astronomer and talking about their technology and blah blah blah." All of a sudden, everybody was like, "Oh, these guys are supportive of what these folks are doing. So let's do what the internet does, which is let's make some comments about what's going on." So, as far as craziest years so far, both from a technology perspective and then even from Aaron and I's perspective and the Cloudcast perspective, it was a little crazy to be right in the middle of one of the bigger 15 minutes of internet fame moments. I don't know if I would call it fame, but 15 minutes of internet that happened this year that the world sort of found out about and was kind of a story for, I don't know, however long it was, 24 hours. But anyways, that was sort of the details of it. Kind of funny timing, funny coincidence that all that stuff happened. And so I don't know if we'll ever be involved with something like that ever again, but it was interesting to watch it happen. It's interesting to me in the middle of something truly globally viral, and to watch something that, just somehow be tagged on those and just sort of watch the notifications roll in is a pretty interesting phenomenon. So I hopefully all of you at some point, won't be on the other end of the Coldplay piece, but maybe you'll get to experience that once in your life. So it's sort of fun. Anyways, I'm going to wrap it up. Like I said, publishing this one on the 28th of December. We will publish one more show on December 31st. Kind of a longer show. Let's gives you something to kind of chew on going into the beginning of 2026. And anyway, so want to thank you all again for a great year of some fun, feedback, of some really interesting feedback on the Weekend Perspective shows. I've enjoyed doing them all. We'll be making some changes in 2026. We'll get those announced, here pretty soon in the next week or so. Really, really thank you for all of your time, for all of your feedback, for all of your suggestions. And again, maybe one last request: if you guys get a chance, if you can go into wherever you listen to your podcast, especially if it's like Apple Podcasts or something. If you want to throw us a 5-star rating, if you want to give us a comment, we would love that. It actually helps the way their algorithm works. To grow the show, it puts the show in front of a lot of new people. Helps us, get the word out there. The things that we talk about, the interactions we have with our community, out to more and more people, which we think always makes for a better community, a better product overall, and it helps us expand our thinking about a lot of the issues we talk about. So if you get a chance, we would greatly appreciate it. We don't ask for very much. We don't charge for the show. So if you could help a little bit with that would be very much appreciated. So with that, thank you very much. Happy New Year. Hope you're having a good year and hope you have a great 2026. And we look forward to spending the year with you. We'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.